The girl had not slept indoors in 9 days, and still the first thing she did when she saw the man stumble on the icy steps outside, the Portage Avenue post office, was reach out with both hands and catch his arm before he fell. Nobody on the sidewalk stopped. Nobody turned around. In a city like Winnipeg, in the middle of a November that had already broken 2 cold records before the month was half done, people moved with their chins tucked and their eyes fixed on the next warm doorway, and a small indigenous girl steadying a tall stranger on a frozen step was the kind of thing that happened and unhappened in the same breath. But that girl, Ren Fenton, 11 years old, with a coat 2 sizes too large, cinched at the waist, with a man's leather belt and boots lined with plastic bags because the soles had cracked through, did not know that the man whose arm she had just grabbed was the founding partner of one of the oldest law firms in Western Canada, that his name had appeared on Supreme Court filings and in the business pages of the Globe and Mail for the better part of 30 years, or that the building she was standing in front of had been partially funded by a donation he had made so quietly that even the plaque inside misspelled his middle initial. She only knew that his left foot had slipped on the black ice, that the leather briefcase in his right hand had swung wide, and that if no one caught him, he was going to land hard on steps that would not forgive a man his age. That single moment, a girl's hand on an old man's elbow outside a post office on a Tuesday afternoon, would begin a story that neither of them expected, and that the city of Winnipeg, years later, would still be telling. Leonard Cahill was 68 years old, and he did not enjoy being caught. He had spent a career catching other people, in negotiations, in courtrooms, in the slow, patient chess of corporate litigation, where the winning move was often the one nobody saw until it was already too late. He was tall even now, though the stoop had started in his shoulders, the way it starts in men who have spent decades leaning over long tables reading fine print. His hair was white and cropped close, military neat, the kind of haircut he had been getting every 3 weeks at the same barbershop on Corydon Avenue since 1986. He wore a dark navy overcoat, well-made but 15 years old, because Leonard had a particular distaste for new things that worked no better than old ones. His shoes were polished, his scarf was gray wool, his briefcase was the same one his wife had given him on his 40th birthday, the leather now darkened and softened with use, the brass clasp slightly bent from the time he had dropped it getting out of a cab in Ottawa in 2004. He had come to the post office to mail a letter. Not an email, not a text, but a letter, handwritten on cream-colored paper, in the careful, slightly cramped script he had learned from his mother, who had believed that a handwritten letter was a promise made in ink. The letter was to his granddaughter in Montreal, who was turning 7 next week, and who had sent him a drawing of a moose wearing a top hat, which Leonard had pinned to the corkboard above his desk at home because it was, in his private opinion, the finest piece of art he had ever received. He had mailed the letter. He had turned toward the steps, and then the ice had found the smooth sole of his left shoe, and the world had tilted. The hand that caught him was small and surprisingly firm. It gripped the sleeve of his overcoat just above the elbow, not gently, not politely, but with the decisive pressure of someone who understood that a falling body does not need courtesy. It needs to be stopped. Leonard steadied himself. He planted the briefcase on the step like a third leg and took a breath of cold air that stung the inside of his nose. Then he looked down. The girl was small. Not young small in the way that children are simply shorter than adults, but thin small, the kind of thinness that comes from weeks of not quite enough. Her face was brown and wind-chapped, with dark eyes that looked up at him from under a hood that had once been red and was now a faded, rain-beaten pink. Her coat, enormous on her, was held shut with a belt that had been punched with extra holes to fit her waist, and her boots, though laced tight, had a crack running along the left sole that she had tried to patch with black electrical tape. On her back was a school bag, the cheap kind you get at dollar stores, with one strap held together by a safety pin. "You all right, sir?" she said. Her voice was quiet and clear, the kind of voice that does not waste words. Leonard blinked. He looked at the ice on the step. He looked at his shoes. He looked at the girl's hand, still resting on his sleeve, and he noticed that her fingers were bare and red at the tips, the nails bitten short. "I am," he said. "Thank you. That would have been an unpleasant fall." She did not smile, said. She did not seem to expect anything. She simply released his sleeve and took a half step back, the way a person steps back from a task that is done. "Ice is bad today. They didn't salt these steps." "No," Leonard said. "They did not." He should have walked on. That was what the afternoon called him for. His driver, Dennis, was waiting in the car on a side street 2 blocks east, engine running, heater on, the way he always waited when Leonard insisted on doing his errands on foot, because walking, Leonard maintained, was the only honest way to know a city. He should have thanked the girl again. descended the steps carefully, and crossed Portage Avenue toward the warm interior of the idling sedan, but something held him on that step. It was not the ice. It was the way the girl had caught him. Not tentatively, not hopefully, not the way a person does a favor with one eye on the reward. She had caught him the way you catch something that is about to break, because it is falling and you are there. And that is all the reason required. He looked at her again. He looked at the bare fingers. He looked at the plastic bags visible above the cracked boots. He looked at the school bag on a Tuesday afternoon, when school had been out for only an hour, and most children her age were in kitchens eating cereal in front of television sets. "It is very cold today," Leonard said. It was not a profound observation. It was the kind of thing one Canadian says to another when they are standing still, and the wind is pushing through the gaps in their clothing, and there is nothing else to say that does not sound like prying. "Yeah," the girl said again. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the small rocking motion of someone whose feet have been cold for a long time and who has learned to keep the blood moving without thinking about it. "Supposed to get worse tonight. -32 with the wind." Leonard absorbed this. He was quiet for a moment. He had spent a career in rooms where silence was a tool, where the person who spoke first usually gave away more than they meant to. And he had learned, slowly and not without cost, that the most important things people needed to tell you would come if you made space for them. So, he made space. He stood on the icy step with his briefcase planted beside him, and he did not fill the silence with questions. The girl looked at him. She seemed to be making a calculation of her own. She was deciding. Leonard would learn much later whether he was the kind of stranger who would call someone, a teacher, a social worker, the police. She had been making that calculation about every adult she encountered for the past 9 days, ever since she had walked out of the group home on Selkirk Avenue in the middle of the night with her school bag over her shoulder and nothing else. Because the man who ran the home had done something that she could not make herself say out loud. And when she had tried to tell the woman at the front desk, the woman had said, "Don't make trouble, Wren," and turned back to her phone. So Wren had left. She had learned in her 11 years that when the people who were supposed to protect you used the word trouble to describe your pain, the safest thing to do was to stop talking and start walking. She had been sleeping in the Millennium Library during the day, tucked into a corner of the 3rd floor near the travel section, where the chairs were deep and the librarians changed shifts often enough that no one noticed her for long. At night, she slept in the heated bus shelters on Graham Avenue, the ones with the orange plastic seats and the overhead vents that blew warm air in 30-second intervals, enough to keep her from freezing if she curled up tight and kept her hood on. She ate what she could find. A granola bar left on a bench, a half-finished sandwich from a garbage can outside Tim Hortons. Once a woman at a soup kitchen near Main Street had given her a bowl of stew and a bun without asking a single question, and Wren had eaten it so fast. She gave herself a stomachache and sat in the bathroom afterward, holding her knees until it passed. She carried her life in the school bag. Inside it was a composition notebook that her mother had given her before she went away, the pages still mostly blank, because Wren was saving them for things worth writing down. A stubby pencil, a toothbrush with flattened bristles, a photograph of her mother standing in front of a lake, squinting into the sun, her hair blowing sideways, smiling the kind of smile that Wren could still feel in her chest when she looked at it, and a small carved wooden bird that her Kukum had made years ago, before the arthritis took her hands, a bird with outstretched wings that fit perfectly in Wren's palm when she wrapped her fingers around it at night. Leonard did not know any of this. He only saw a girl on a frozen step who had caught him when he fell and who was now standing in the wind without gloves and without anywhere particular to go. "I am going to walk to my car," Leonard said. "It is about 2 blocks east. I would be grateful for the company, if you are not in a hurry." He did not know why he said it. Or rather, he did know, but the knowing was buried in a place that did not have neat language for itself. A place that had to do with his mother, who had come to Winnipeg from a village in Scotland, with 4 pounds in her pocket, and had told him once, kneeling beside his bed when he was 8, and frightened of the dark, that the world asked very little of you in the end. Only that you not walk past the thing you could see. "You don't have to fix it, Leonard," she had said. "You just have to not pretend it isn't there." Wren looked at him. She looked at the briefcase, at the polished shoes, at the white hair, at the still, patient expression on his face. She was good at reading faces. She had to be. And this face did not look like the face of a man who was going to call someone. "Okay," she said. They walked. The wind on Portage Avenue came straight and hard from the west, the kind of prairie wind that does not bother going around things, but simply goes through them. And Wren pulled her hood tighter, and Leonard turned the collar of his overcoat up, and they moved east along the sidewalk at the pace of the older man's careful steps. The ice was treacherous. It lay in long, polished sheets on the concrete, invisible until your foot was already on it, and Leonard walked with the slow deliberation of a man who had already been reminded once today of what the ground could do to him. They did not talk at first. Leonard had never been a man who spoke to Phil Shucks. He had argued cases in front of the highest courts in the country, and he had learned that the most effective sentences were the ones surrounded by silence. Wren, for her part, was concentrating on the sidewalk, on the patches of salt and sand that marked the safe places to step, and on the quiet arithmetic she was always doing in her head. How cold it was, how many hours until dark, where she would sleep tonight. After a block, Leonard spoke. "What is your name?" "Wren," she said. She did not give her last name, she had learned not to. "Wren," he said it slowly. The way a man reads an inscription on something old. "That is a good name." Small bird, big voice. She glanced up at him. "My kukum named me," she said. "Wrens are the ones who sing first in the morning before anyone else is awake. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." She was. Leonard heard the past tense. He did not press it. They walked another half block, in silence past a Vietnamese restaurant where the steam from the kitchen vents made a warm cloud on the sidewalk that they both walked through without mentioning it, past a pawn shop with a neon sign that buzzed and flickered, past a bus stop where 3 people stood in a tight cluster with their backs to the wind like cattle in a field. "Wren," Leonard said, "have you had anything to eat today?" The question was careful. It did not lean. It did not pry. It sat in the cold air between them like a door that could be opened or left shut. Wren was quiet for 4 steps. Then she said, "I had some crackers this morning." Leonard nodded. He did not say, "I am sorry." He did not say, "That is not enough." He simply nodded, the way a man nods when he has heard something clearly and is giving it the weight it deserves. The car was where Dennis always left it, on a side street off Donald, angled into a spot near a meter that Leonard paid for, even when he was only gone 20 minutes, because he believed that small rules were the ones that mattered most. The car was a dark green sedan. Nothing flashy, the kind of car a senior partner at a law firm might drive for 10 years without ever thinking about replacing it. Dennis was standing beside it, a large man in a wool coat and a flat cap, holding a paper cup of coffee and watching the street the way he had been watching streets for Leonard for 16 years. When he saw his employer approaching with a small girl beside him, his face did not change, but he straightened slightly and set his coffee on the roof of the car. "Dennis," Leonard said, "this is Wren. She kept me from falling on the post office steps." Dennis looked at the girl. He looked at the cracked boots, the oversized coat, the bare fingers. He had worked for Leonard Cahill long enough to recognize the beginnings of a thing. "Miss Wren," Dennis said. He touched the brim of his cap. "That was good of you. Those steps are a hazard." Wren blinked. Nobody had ever called her Miss before. The sound of it settled into a place between her ribs that she did not have a name for. "Thanks," she said quietly. Leonard paused beside the car. He looked at Wren, and then he looked at the sky, which was already beginning to darken at the edges with the early dusk of a Manitoba November, the light draining out of it the way water drains from a shallow pan. "Wren," he said, "I am going to have an early supper at a restaurant not far from here. It is run by a woman named Colette, who makes the best tourtière in the province. And I am not saying that as a compliment, I am saying it as a legal fact. I would be glad of the company if you are interested." He paused. He did not crouch down. He did not change his voice. He spoke to her the way he would have spoken to a colleague he was inviting to a working dinner. "You are not obligated. Dennis can drive you wherever you need to go. No questions asked. I only wanted to offer." Wren stood on the sidewalk in the fading light. Her feet ached with cold. Her stomach, which she had trained to be quiet, made a sound she hoped he could not hear. She thought about the bus shelter on Graham Avenue and the 30-second intervals of warm air. She thought about the wooden bird in her bag and the photograph of her mother at the lake. She thought about all the things she had been taught about strangers and all the things she had learned about the kind of strangers who call you miss and do not ask questions you are not ready to answer. "Okay," Wren said. "Yeah, thank you." Leonard opened the rear door himself before Dennis could reach it and gestured with the same brief, formal courtesy he had once used to hold doors open for judges and cabinet ministers. Wren hesitated for a moment at the threshold, the way a person hesitates at the edge of warm water, not sure if the warmth is real. Then she climbed in. The seat was warm. The car smelled of leather and something faintly woody, cedar maybe, and there was a heater running somewhere beneath the dash that filled the space with a warmth so even and so steady that Wren felt her shoulders drop for the first time in 9 days. She sat with her school bag on her lap and her hands folded on top of it, and she tried to take up as little space as possible. Leonard settled in beside her. Dennis closed the door, circled to the front, and pulled out of the spot with the unhurried patience of a man who had been driving careful routes through winter streets for half his adult life. "Dennis," Leonard said. "Colette's, please. Tell her it will be 2 tonight, and that one of us has a steadier hand than I do on the ice." "Yes, sir," Dennis said. He glanced once in the rearview mirror, caught Wren's eye, and gave her a nod that was small and warm, and did not ask for anything in return. The restaurant was on a quiet street in St. Boniface, the old French quarter on the east side of the river, where the signs were in both languages, and the buildings had the low, sturdy look of things that had been standing, since before anyone thought Winnipeg would amount to much. Colette's had no sign on the outside, only a house number painted on the glass above a dark green door. And when Dennis opened the door for them, the heat that poured out smelled of pastry and onion and something roasting slowly in a way that meant it had been in the oven since morning. The room inside was small, 8 tables, maybe 10, covered with plain white cloths, each one set with heavy cutlery that looked like it had been inherited rather than bought. The walls were a deep, warm cream, hung with old photographs of the Red River in summer and ice fishing shacks, and a woman in a fur-trimmed coat, standing in front of a snowbank taller than she was, laughing. A wood stove in the corner was ticking with heat. A woman came out from the kitchen. She was perhaps 60, short and solid, with her gray hair cut in a practical bob and flower on one sleeve of her sweater. When she saw Leonard, she crossed the room and took both of his hands the way you take the hands of someone you have known for decades and do not need to impress. "Leonard, 3 weeks. You disappear for 3 weeks and I am supposed to just keep your table empty. I had a procedure, Colette, a procedure. You had a procedure and you did not call me. I did not want to worry you. Too late." She squeezed his hands once firmly and released them. Then she turned and saw Wren, who was standing a step behind Leonard with her bag held against her chest. Colette did not gasp. She did not tilt her head or soften her voice into something sweet and careful. She lowered herself slowly until her face was level with Wren's, and she looked at the girl the way you look at someone you have been expecting. "And who is this?" "This is Wren," Leonard said. "She saved me from the ice on the Portage post office steps." "Wren," Colette said. "I like that. Are you hungry, Wren?" Wren nodded. She did not trust her voice. "Good," Colette said, and stood. "Then we are already friends." She led them to a table by the window where the last light of the afternoon came through the glass thin and gold and laid itself across the white cloth like something poured. She pulled out Wren's chair with the same care she would have shown a visiting dignitary. Wren sat. The chair was solid beneath her. The wood stove ticked. Colette disappeared and returned a moment later with a basket of bread, fresh and warm, and a small dish of butter and another of cretons, the Quebecois pork spread that Wren had never seen before, but that smelled of garlic and thyme and something deeply, fundamentally good. Leonard settled across from Wren, set his briefcase beside his chair, and folded his hands on the table. "Eat as much as you want," he said. "Colette bakes twice a day. We will not run out." Wren reached for the bread. Her hand shook. Not much. Not in a way that someone across a crowded room would notice, but in the small, private way that hands shake when a body has been running on nothing for too long and is suddenly confronted with warmth and food and a table with a clean white cloth. She tore a piece carefully, the way you tear something you are not sure belongs to you. She spread a small amount of butter on it. She put it in her mouth. The bread was soft and warm and tasted like a kitchen she had never been in but somehow remembered. She chewed slowly. She kept her eyes on the table. Leonard did not watch her eat. That was the thing Wren noticed first and the thing she would carry with her for the rest of her life. He did not lean forward. He did not study her face. He did not say any of the gentle, pitying things that adults said when they saw a hungry child eating bread as if the bread might be taken away. He simply reached for his own piece, tore it slowly, and turned his gaze toward the window where the Winnipeg sky was doing its long, slow November fade from gray to deep blue. He talked about small things, the elm trees on Wellington Crescent that had survived the Dutch disease when everyone said they would not. A curling match Dennis had taken him to see at the Fort Rouge Club the previous winter. The way Colette's bread recipe had not changed in 30 years, and the way she considered this a point of fierce personal honor. He spoke the way you leave a light on in a room for someone who is not ready to come out yet. Steady, warm, undemanding. Colette brought soup. She brought tourtière with a flaky golden crust and a side of roasted root vegetables, parsnips and carrots and beets from someone's garden, cut thick and glossy with butter. She brought a glass of milk for Wren and a coffee for Leonard, and she refilled the bread basket once without being asked and once more when she noticed it was empty again. She did not ask Wren where she was from. She did not ask Leonard what the occasion was. She moved through her small, warm room the way a woman moves through a house she has built with her hands, tending to the people inside it, because that was the work. And the work was enough. Halfway through the tourtière, Wren set her fork down. She had eaten more in the last 20 minutes than she had eaten in the last 4 days. Her stomach, which had forgotten what fullness felt like, was struggling to remember. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at the table. She looked at Leonard. "Sir," she said, "can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything," Leonard said. "Why are you doing this?" Leonard did not answer immediately. He set his coffee cup into its saucer with the slow precision of a man who has handled fragile things all his life. He looked at Wren across the table, and the last of the daylight through the window caught the white of his hair and the deep lines beside his eyes, the kind of lines that come not from smiling or frowning, but from years of paying close attention. That is a fair question," he said, "and it deserves a real answer." He paused. "When I was 12 years old," Leonard said, "my mother and I lived in a basement apartment in the North End. Not far from here, actually. You could still smell the stockyards some mornings when the wind was right. My father had left when I was small, and my mother cleaned offices at night and took in alterations during the day. She was a good seamstress. People brought her things that other tailors said could not be mended, and she mended them. We did not have much. There were months when the rent came first, and the food came second, and there were weeks when my mother ate nothing at supper so that I could eat twice." He stopped. He took a sip of coffee. Wren did not move. "One winter morning," Leonard continued, "I was walking to school along Selkirk Avenue, and I passed an old woman trying to get her wheelchair up a curb. The sidewalk had not been plowed and the snow was packed hard, and she could not get the front wheels over the lip. She was by herself. People were walking past. I was late for school, and I had not eaten breakfast, and I remember standing there thinking that someone else would stop. Someone older, someone who was not 12 and not hungry and not already in trouble for being late the day before." He looked at Wren steadily. "No one stopped," he said. "So I did. I pushed her wheelchair up the curb, and I walked beside her for 3 blocks to make sure she did not get stuck again, and when we got to her building, she asked me to come inside. Her name was Mrs. Savard. She was 81 years old. She made me a cheese sandwich and a cup of tea with too much sugar, and she talked to me for an hour about her late husband, who had been a carpenter, and about the house he had built with his hands in Lac du Bonnet before the war." Leonard set his cup down. "She fed me breakfast every school morning for the next 2 years. Every single morning. She never asked where my father was. She never called anyone. She simply opened her door at 7:15 and there was toast and tea and a place at her table. She is the reason I finished school. She is the reason I went to university. She is the reason I am sitting here." He was quiet for a moment. "You caught me on the steps today," Leonard said. "When you had no reason to, you did not know who I was. You did not expect anything. You just saw a person about to fall and you reached out. That is what Mrs. Savard saw that morning on Selkirk Avenue, a boy who stopped when no one else would. So I am doing for you what she did for me. That is all." Wren looked at the white tablecloth. She looked at the breadcrumbs. She looked at the window where the streetlights of St. Boniface had come on, casting long yellow reflections on the snow. She thought about Mrs. Savard, a woman in a wheelchair on a cold sidewalk 60 years ago, opening her door. She thought about her own Kukum, who had carved the wooden bird with wings spread, and who had said to her once, sitting on the porch of the house in Norway House while the lake turned gold in the evening light, "You carry what you're given, my girl, and you pass it on. That's the whole thing. That's all there is." "Sir," Wren said, and her voice was very small. "I don't know how to say thank you big enough for this." "You already said it," Leonard said. On the steps, they finished their meal slowly. Colette brought a dish of pouting chômeur without being asked, the Quebecois cake with hot maple syrup pooled in the bottom, and Wren ate it one careful spoonful at a time, making it last the way she had learned to make all good things last. The other tables filled with neighbors and regulars who stamped snow off their boots and greeted Colette by name and ordered without looking at menus. Leonard spoke to a few of them. He introduced Wren to no one. He understood, without being told, that being seen was not the same as being shown. When the meal was done, Colette walked them to the door. She bent to Wren's height and said, "You come back, with Leonard or without. You tell whoever is here that Colette is expecting you, and there will always be a plate." "Yes, ma'am," Wren said. "Thank you." Outside, the temperature had dropped the way it drops in Winnipeg, not gradually but all at once, as if someone had opened a door to a larger, colder room. The stars were out. Dennis was waiting by the car with his collar up and his breath making small white clouds in the dark. Leonard paused on the sidewalk. "Wren," he said, "I am going to ask you one more thing tonight, and I want you to know that you are free to say no, and that saying no will not change anything I have said or anything Colette has said." He looked at her carefully. I live in a house in Wolseley, about 15 minutes from here. It is an old house with too many rooms for one person, and a woman named Greta who takes care of it and who has been telling me for years that the guest room on the main floor never gets used and that this is a waste of good linen. The room has a bed with clean sheets. It has a door that locks from the inside. It has a window that looks out onto an elm tree that is older than the neighborhood. I would like to offer you that room for tonight and for as long as you need it, while we work out together what comes next. He paused. You may say no. Dennis will drive you wherever you ask him to drive you. I will not be hurt. But I am 68 years old, and I have spent a career learning that the most important things should be said plainly. So I am saying it plainly. Wren stood on the sidewalk outside Colette's restaurant in her oversized coat with the belt cinched tight and her cracked boots and her school bag with the safety-pinned strap. She looked up at the tall man with the white hair and the navy overcoat and the briefcase his wife had given him 28 years ago. She thought about the bus shelter on Graham Avenue and the 30-second intervals of warm air. She thought about the door that locks from the inside. She thought about her kukum, who had said, "You carry what you're given, my girl." She thought about the wooden bird in her bag, the one with outstretched wings, the one she held every night to fall asleep. Yeah, Wren said. Okay. Thank you, sir. The drive to Wolseley took 12 minutes. They crossed the Provencher Bridge over the frozen Red River and moved west through the city, past the golden dome of the legislature lit up against the dark sky, past the bare elms of the Broadway median, into the quiet streets where the houses were old and deep-porched and set back from the road behind hedges heavy with snow. Wren watched through the window. The city looked different from inside a warm car. Smaller, gentler. The cold could not reach her. Leonard's house was a two-story craftsman with dark green trim and a wide front porch and smoke coming from the chimney in a thin, steady line. A wreath of spruce boughs hung on the door and the porch light was on, casting a yellow circle on the snows. Greta was waiting in the front hall. She was a small woman in her 60s with short silver hair and a cardigan buttoned to the top and the kind of face that had been practical and kind for so long that the two things had become indistinguishable. She looked at Wren. She looked at the cracked boots and the bare fingers and the school bag. She did not fuss. Come in, she said. The kettle's on. Are you tired? Wren nodded. The guest room is ready, Greta said. Clean towels on the bed. The lock works from the inside. You turn it left. That was the beginning. The story did not end that night, because real stories never do. It went on through that winter and into the spring, when the elms on Wolseley Avenue finally put out their leaves and the Red River thawed and the city exhaled. Leonard's firm, quietly and without publicity, connected Wren with the right people, the kind of people who listened first and acted second. Her grandmother's family in Norway House was contacted. A proper guardian was arranged. Wren went back to school, a school where the teachers knew her name and did not ask her to explain the month she had missed. She kept the wooden bird in the pocket of a new coat that fit her, a coat Greta had taken her to buy at a shop on Corydon Avenue, where the woman behind the counter measured her twice and said, "A good coat is a promise that someone is paying attention." She kept the photograph of her mother in the same pocket. The story of how they met did not become a news item. There were no cameras on the Portage Avenue post office steps that Tuesday afternoon, and no one in the city of Winnipeg had any reason to know that one of the most respected lawyers in Western Canada had been caught from falling by a girl who had been sleeping in bus shelters and had been taken to dinner by a man she did not know. The story stayed between them, the way the truest stories always do. Leonard did not mention it at the firm. Wren did not tell anyone at school. Only Dennis and Colette and Greta knew, and they were the kind of people who knew how to hold a thing that was not theirs to tell. Years passed. Leonard retired from the firm and spent his mornings reading on the porch and his afternoons walking the river path with Dennis, who had by then stopped being a driver and become simply a friend. He saw Wren graduate from high school. He saw her accepted to the University of Manitoba, into the faculty of Colba, into the faculty of social work, on a bursary that Leonard had funded through the university's foundation in a way that ensured his name appeared nowhere on the paperwork. He did not see her graduate, because he died in his sleep in the house in Wolseley the March before, with Greta sitting beside him, and Wren holding his hand and reading aloud from a book of letters his mother had written from Scotland, the ones in careful ink on cream-colored paper that smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. In Leonard's will, there was a letter for Wren. It was short. It was written in his own hand, the cramped, careful script his mother had taught him. It said, "I want you to remember 3 things. The first is that your kukum gave you your name, and every time you say it, she is still giving it. The second is that you caught me when I was falling, and I have never stopped being grateful. The third is that the world does not get better on its own. It gets better because someone decides to reach out when they have every reason not to, and you, Ren Fenton, reached. Ren is 34 years old now. She runs a network of emergency shelters across Manitoba for Indigenous children who have nowhere safe to sleep. The shelters are small and warm, and each one has a door that locks from the inside. She named the program after a woman she never met, a woman in a wheelchair on Selkirk Avenue, who opened her door every morning at 7:15 for a hungry boy who grew up to open doors for others. She calls it Savard House. And on the front porch of every shelter, winter and summer, there is a small carved wooden bird with outstretched wings, because Ren believes, the way her Kukum believed, and the way Leonard believed, and the way Mrs. Savard believed before any of them, that the only thing you can do with what you have been given is carry it forward, and that the carrying is the whole point, and that it is enough. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment telling me which part touched you the most, and where you are watching from tonight. And if you know someone who is carrying something heavy alone, share this with them. Subscribe for more stories of quiet kindness and second chances. Thank you for being here.